I'm sure that Wole is able to address already immediately some of the points that you brought up, but certainly lots of stuff to think about. And we have a Q&A session at the end of the 2.5 hours. Not sure if you will be there, but any question related to your presentation will be forwarded to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Over to you all. Thank you so much.
Wole, maybe you would like to introduce yourself in a few sentences.
Sure.
Time.
Absolutely. Can you hear and see me okay?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Thank you for your indulgence. I had some technical issues getting connected, but glad to be on. And thank you, Linda, for inviting me. It's incredible for me to realize that it's been a year since the last conference. I think we talked about that. There's been so much change and just the pace of innovation in AI since just 1 year ago has been breathtaking. And so the time is passing quickly. So my name is Wole Moses, and I'm the Chief AI Officer for Microsoft Federal Civilian, based here in the US. And in my role, I work with the federal civilian agencies, government agencies in the US to help them in their AI adoption and in AI use cases, as well as to understand how to implement AI responsibly. Next slide, please. All right, and so my talk today will be about AI assistance. I want to thank the previous speakers. In particular, I like the optimistic tone that the previous speaker, Dr. Amrith, took with respect to the possibilities that AI can present to us. And so I'll build on that point of view with some specific examples. But I wanted to start here in terms of why do we keep hearing about AI? It seems like in the past 2 years we can't escape the topic, and so we know that AI isn't new. So what is different about this particular AI, and in particular generative AI? What's so different about it, and what are the opportunities that it presents that have engendered all this conversation and in some cases a little bit of angst? And so if you take a step back and think about what we've always had from an enterprise computing context, we've always had this, by the way, is a tweet that I included in my presentation because it really spoke to me, and I think it did a good job of encapsulating the impact and the value of generative AI. So it's from Aaron Levy, who's the founder and CEO of Box.com. I'm not going to read the entire tweet. I've essentially distilled the main points down into a few bullets here and added a few of my thoughts. But essentially what he's saying is that in the enterprise context, we've always had great tools and great ways to manage, search, and analyze structured data. So if we think about structured data, maybe in a clinical trials context, that might be some of the demographic data that is collected, stored, analyzed, and used. It might be another form of structured data might be lab results. That might include things like adverse event logs. Like we have great tools and methodologies. A lot of times we're using databases and some other types of systems to get to analyze and search through this structured data. But the thing that he's pointing out here in this tweet is that coincidentally, in the enterprise context, most data is actually unstructured data. And so we, again, think about that in the clinical trials context or any sort of clinical context. That unstructured data might be things like clinical notes. It could be research papers. Think about all of the research papers that are published, read through, and interpreted. It could be policy and regulatory documents that we need to read through and understand. Patient diaries. And then not to mention some of the unstructured data from the tools we use, including emails, chats, et cetera, et cetera. And so the majority of the data that is used in most enterprises are unstructured in format. So the value and the new thing the thing that's creating a lot of excitement about generative AI is because for the first time, we have a way to use AI to reason over unstructured data. A lot of that unstructured data that I just called out, the research papers, the regulatory and policy documents, those had to be read and interpreted by humans. In some cases, because we have limited bandwidth, we have time constraints, we really don't have an opportunity to extract full value from them. We don't have an opportunity to read as many research papers as we might want to. We don't have the opportunity to go into a lot of the policy and regulatory documents that we might want to, that we could extract value from. And so
Please
yes.
excuse me if I interrupt you here. I just see from our participants that on some screens, your presentation is not available. So I'm just trying to switch one more time.
Okay.
And just a note to everybody, please, who cannot see Ron's presentation at the moment. The title is "What's So Different About Generative AI?" It might help if you refresh the browser. So for everybody who's not seeing Wole's presentation, please refresh the browser. Thank you very much.
No problem. Okay, so yeah, really the main point is that generative AI for the first time gives us a way to leverage artificial intelligence to read through unstructured data that we previously, as humans, quite frankly, didn't have the bandwidth to fully capitalize on. And so that's what's really interesting. And the other thing that we're seeing, and I'll talk about some of the use cases, some of the real world use cases that are emerging, is with generative AI, we can also transform unstructured data into structured data. And so think about a research paper, a lengthy research paper. Imagine extracting just key data points from lots of research papers and then doing analysis on those. That's the type of thing we can do with generative AI, which is so innovative and different from previous forms of AI. Next slide, please. All right, so in my presentation, I'm going to build on what the previous speaker, Dr. Ahmed, talked about in terms of some of the tooling and infrastructure and platforms that are some of the real world applications of AI. And so from a Microsoft perspective, we really have two different approaches to offering AI tooling, generative AI in particular, for our customers. And so you've probably heard about things like co-pilots. And so we have lots of different co-pilots. I'll define that in a minute. And then we also, from a Microsoft perspective, have platforms and tools for others to build on. So the co-pilots are these ready-made applications that we built and where we've infused generative AI into existing applications. And so these are sort of ready-made for people to use. And then the second part of what we offer are tooling and platforms, APIs for organizations to build their own custom generative AI solutions for the scenarios that Microsoft, quite frankly, isn't necessarily building for. Next slide, please. All right, so what is an AI copilot? So an AI copilot, so a couple of things I'll talk about in terms of defining an AI copilot. So an AI copilot is a conversational interface. So think about why ChatGPT took off so quickly and why ChatGPT is one of the most used applications today. Well, it's because of the ability to use conversational language to ask questions based on the knowledge that it's been trained on. And so that conversational interface is a key part of what defines a co-pilot. And so we think about this in an enterprise context. With ChatGPT, we use ChatGPT to surface knowledge based on what it's been trained on, which is essentially the entirety of the internet. So that's one thing. In an enterprise context, we use conversational interface similar to ChatGPT to surface knowledge based on what's the data that we have within our enterprise. I'll talk about that a little bit more and give you some examples. The second thing about that defines a co-pilot is that these are typically integrated into existing applications. So co-pilots are typically not new applications. They are basically where we have existing SaaS applications and we infuse generative AI capabilities into them, creating an intelligent experience, an intelligent assistant within that existing application. And so Microsoft has lots of different co-pilots. For example, we have one called GitHub Copilot. Our very first copilot was GitHub Copilot. GitHub Copilot is artificial intelligence infused into we have a tool called Visual Studio Code, which is a programming environment. And so we've infused conversational language, generative AI into that tool to augment software coding and to augment software migration tasks. And so we now have an intelligent experience inside of that application. Copilot for Microsoft 365, which I'll talk about a little bit later, similar, another SaaS application. It was a standalone application that we've now infused generative AI into, creating a more intelligent version of that application. The third bullet is really key. And so another really important thing about copilots is that they are grounded on data specific to the application. And so I talked about earlier ChatGPT. So ChatGPT is essentially it's trained on everything on the internet. Think about it that way. Well, Copilot for Microsoft 365 is grounded on information within your Microsoft 365, within your Office 365 environment. So your documents, your emails, your chats, your OneDrive and SharePoint files that you've been given permission to, only what you've been explicitly given permission to. So that's the difference between something like an enterprise copilot and ChatGPT. An enterprise copilot is grounded on can access things inside of the enterprise that ChatGPT was never trained on. And then the fourth thing about copilots are that they're designed to increase productivity, knowledge, and the capabilities of users of that application. So we're infusing a conversational interface into an existing SaaS application in order to augment the user of that application. Next slide, please. All right, so I wanted to, for those who haven't seen Copilot for Microsoft 365, I wanted to give you an example of how I use Copilot for Microsoft 365 in my day. So Copilot for Microsoft 365, if you use Microsoft 365 out there, you know that it's a set of productivity tools and environments from Microsoft. So this is all about knowledge worker productivity, collaboration. We have Microsoft Teams, we have Outlook, we have all these different applications in there, which are really about productivity. And so the idea around Copilot for Microsoft 365 is that, so we're going to take this Microsoft 365 environment and we're going to build an intelligent assistant in that environment. It's almost like giving everyone a personal assistant or a chief of staff to help you reason over all of the things that you do within your Microsoft 365 environment. And so some of the things that I do, a few ways I use Microsoft 365, and I think these are pretty universal tasks for most people. So the first way is just getting ready for my day, getting started and getting organized, especially if I've been traveling or I've been out of the office with meetings. And so in the blue, you'll see, so these, by the way, these are real screenshots from my Microsoft 365 implementation. And so I'm showing you some prompts that I use and the responses. I've redacted, if you see the orange blocks there, those are redactions where some of my colleagues' names are in there. And so on their behalf, I've redacted some of that. But here I'm asking Copilot to summarize my emails, my Teams message, and my Teams channel messages from the last week where I've been explicitly mentioned, where someone's actually said my name or asked me to do something. So think about this in terms of being out of the office in a busy week of meetings or due to travel, and you come back into the office, you got all this email, familiar scenario for many people, I'm sure, and you just want to get to the things that are most important because you get a lot of emails that you're copied on, but maybe there's no action for you. And so this prompt is designed to help me just get to the bottom of all that. So I said, summarize all those things where I've been mentioned explicitly, and then also put it in a table format, because for me, the way I think, I like to see things in tables. It really helps me organize myself and understand my actions. And then I've asked it to tell me where there are actions assigned to me, because that's what I care about. And then I've also said, hey, use your intelligence to even where there haven't been explicit actions, tell me what you think I should do as follow-ups. And so that's what it's done here. So if you had a chance to look at that, these are some of the real things that in the past week that have been asked of me, the action items assigned to me, and then the suggested follow-ups. And so here's that modality that I talked about in terms of having a personal assistant or a chief of staff shadowing me, who only has access to what I have access to, but helping me get organized in my day. Next slide, please. All right, second scenario, second way I use Copilot is in meetings. Who out there is in lots of meetings all day, all week? I certainly am. And so the second way, and probably the game changer scenario for me, again, I think this is universal no matter what you do in your professionally, is to have more efficient meetings. And so this prompt here, I'm not sure if you can read it, but I say at the top, I say, catch me up on this meeting. So there's a meeting that I was invited to, but I had to miss because of a meeting conflict, or maybe I was traveling. And so I had my colleagues turn on Copilot during that meeting. So Copilot isn't on by default. You have to explicitly turn it on. And so I had my colleagues use Copilot during that meeting so that when I came back into the office, I could just query Copilot about what happened in the meeting. And that's what I've done here. So I came back, I said, hey, catch me up on this meeting so I don't have to listen to the recording. And so I don't have to use my colleagues' time to get a debrief from the meeting. Copilot can do that for me. So it went through, it gave me a summary of the meeting. It told me all the key points. I can ask follow-up questions at the bottom of the screen. I asked, were there any actions assigned to me during this meeting that I missed? And so it told me that there were no actions assigned to me, thankfully. And then the other thing that you can do is that think about these environments where you're operating in sort of multinational environments, and you have folks who speak different languages. You could also ask it to translate it. And so in this case, I say, hey, translate this meeting summary that you just did into Turkish. I can do it in many, many languages. And so it translated that meeting summary into Turkish for me. Let's say I'm a Turkish native speaker, and it's easier for me to understand and process that. And so that's what it's done there. Now, the other way that you can use, so these are scenarios where I use Copilot for a meeting that I missed. You can also use Copilot during a meeting. Let's say I joined a meeting 10 minutes late and I want to catch up on the meeting without distracting from the meeting itself. I can, in the background, ask Copilot, hey, what's happened in the meeting so far? What are the key points that have been discussed, et cetera, et cetera. So second way I use it is catching up on meetings. Next slide, please. And then the third thing that I wanted to share here is really around knowledge sharing and collaboration in an enterprise environment. One of the biggest problems within enterprise environments is that there's so much expertise and knowledge within the environment, but we often don't know who to go to or where to go for that information. So you've got maybe really good documents stored somewhere on a SharePoint or a OneDrive, and you have experts within the organization, but how do you know how to find it? And that's where that conversational interface that I talked about earlier. So similar to what we can do within ChatGPT, within Copilot for Microsoft 365, we can use conversational language to ask questions and to get information that's stored within our Microsoft 365 environment. And so in this case, I'm asking who in the company knows about our so this is a very Microsoft specific question. So quantum computing, if you're familiar with it, is one of the next breakthroughs in technology, and a lot of folks are concerned about it because it could make a lot of the ways we do encryption today irrelevant. And so a lot of our customers are asking, what is the Microsoft quantum readiness strategy? Within the organization I sit in, we don't have any experts, but within larger Microsoft, we do. And so I asked that question, and it showed me some research papers that folks within all of Microsoft have written. And it also told me who some of those experts are. These are not people who I know, and these are not people who I would have easily found, but Copilot was able to find them for me. So again, I just showed you 3 different ways that I use Copilot: getting ready for my day, using it in meetings, and then finding information within the organization. I think those are probably applicable to most organizations. Next slide, please. All right, so I tried to sort of think about a day in the life of a clinical trial professional with Copilot. Again, the tasks that the scenarios that I just outlined are, I think, pretty universal, but think about this in the work that you might do. So let's say you're a clinical research coordinator. Wouldn't it be incredible to have this intelligent assistant be able to automatically draft patient visit summaries and follow-up emails? By the way, Copilot doesn't function as an autopilot. We called it Copilot for a reason. And so anything it does it will actually, so it might create a summary for you, but it won't send it. These are just, it helps you to accelerate your process, but it lets you, the user is the person empowered to either send that summary, you can revise it, update it. You are in complete control. A principal investigator accessing expertise from within the organization related to some complex aspect of a clinical trial. I showed you that example of me asking a question about quantum computing and being able to find that the expertise within my organization. Using this conversational language to do that is really the game changer. And then a regulatory affairs specialist using meeting summaries. Let's say I'm in a meeting about drug regulation in some other part of the world, and I want to make sure that I have a meeting summary, and I want to make sure that meeting summary is accurate and with follow-ups and details that I can use. Also, I can translate the language. One thing that I forgot to point out in the previous slides were that when we ask Copilot when Copilot presents us with information, you may have seen it included references it's part of its response. And so that's really around reliability and accuracy. So how do we make sure that the information that it presented is accurate? Well, it presents us references so that I can go back and validate it. And so that's an important part of so the first speaker, I think, maybe portrayed a little bit of a scary view of AI. A lot of these problems that have been initially called out, some of the sort of the problems that have been called out about why AI is unsafe, those problems are being solved for today. And so that's one example. I'll talk about that a little bit more as well. Next slide, please. All right, so I just talked about Copilots, and in particular, Copilot for Microsoft 365, one of the Copilot tools that Microsoft is releasing. The other way that Microsoft is helping organizations with generative AI is by providing tools and platforms for organizations to build their own bespoke generative AI capabilities, their own tools. Microsoft does a lot of things, but there's a lot of things that we don't do and that we will never do. So what if you could build your own organizational co-pilots for your own processes, for your own use cases? That's what we do with some of the tools that we have, including tools like Azure AI Studio. And so with that tool set, you can build, for example, in this space, HIPAA compliant solutions. You can build conversational search on private data types of solutions. I'll give you some examples of what we're seeing happen right now with many customers. You can build solutions to analyze and extract insights from unstructured data. So imagine you have a bunch of research papers and you only care about a few things from 100 research papers, and you want AI to automatically pull out those details from those papers. Those are the types of things that folks are doing with generative AI. Building agent solutions, AI agents as well, customer service chatbots, using lots of different models, and then underlined with data privacy, security, responsible AI as well. That's an important part of the overall infrastructure with which an organization should build on top of. Next slide, please. All right, so here's some of the use cases that we're seeing. So we've had generative AI services available to enterprise organizations for about 1.5 years now. So what I'm showing you here is what we're seeing in the U.S. federal government context, the space that I operate in. But again, I think some of these will be universally applicable. And so what are some of those top use cases for organizations who are building their own custom generative AI solutions? Well, content generation. So generative AI, almost by definition, is very good at generating things. And so synthesizing, we're seeing in that category, we're seeing a lot of organizations that have lots of reports that they have to generate. They're using generative AI to assist them in the generation of those reports, not making up things in the reports, but pulling in existing data and synthesizing it into a coherent report. We're also seeing organizations like CDC, agencies like the Center for Disease Control, using generative AI to revise and update their websites. They have websites that are meant to communicate with citizens, but many of these websites are written by PhDs. And so the altitude at which they're communicating may not be understood by the average citizen. So CDC went out on an initiative to rewrite many of their websites using generative AI, and that's been quite successful. Document analysis, I've talked about this at length. The ability to use generative AI to analyze and extract insights from lots of different documents at scale is really a game changer for many organizations. Application modernization, many of our customers have legacy codes that they need to modernize, old languages that they're very diminishing number of people who can program in and understand. Generative AI has seen that old software language and is able to convert it, first of all, document it to explain what it's doing, and then convert it into a modern language. Search and knowledge mining. So imagine being able to develop a solution similar to ChatGPT where we can use conversational language to ask questions, but in this case, we're using conversation to ask questions about our own documents. Let's say we want to build an application to use conversational language to interpret research that we've done, or to interpret policies that we have to abide by. Those are the types of solutions that many organizations are developing. And then customer service, both customer service chatbots, but also call center analysis. We have lots of different customers who have lots of call center calls that are recorded, but they don't have the manpower to actually listen to all of those call center calls to understand what's happening. That's another example of generative AI being able to listen to and interpret that unstructured set of call center calls and then derive insights based on what we care about. Next slide, please. So here's a really cool example from NIH called Trial GPT. So NIH, as many of you know, and as many organizations are responsible for, is really in the business of doing clinical trials. And one of the big problems that they face is matching patients to the right types of clinical trials. And so they built this application using one of our Azure platform services, the Azure OpenAI service called Trial GPT. You can read about it, but it's basically really about clinical patient to clinical trial matching. And what they found is that it improved the clinical trial matching by 43%. So a really good example of how an organization can build their own bespoke solution, bespoke generative AI solution that is applicable to some of the problems that they're trying to solve in this case with NIH. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's also the matter of truthfulness. You've heard maybe with the first speaker, and maybe in general, you've heard like this whole concept around hallucination. How can I trust generative AI platforms or generative AI tools are telling me the truth? How do I make sure that the outputs are reliable? Let's talk about that in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So if you heard the concept of hallucinations, if you're not familiar with that terminology, are described as when a generative AI tool gives an output that is not grounded in the truth, that is, an untruthful output. And so that might happen for lots of different reasons. One of the reasons it happens is that someone may ask generative AI a question that the generative AI tool or platform has never been trained on. And so in this case, I asked this question. So I'm in this, what the environment I'm showing you here is called the Azure OpenAI environment. So this is the Azure AI Studio. So this is an environment that organizations can use to build their own generative AI capabilities. And so I'm asking here, what topics will be covered at this Integrity Virtual Conference, October 8th, 2024. And so this model has been trained up until, I think, 2022, the model that I'm asking this question to. So there's no way it would know the answer to this question. In the past, it might have actually made up an answer. But again, AI is improving. So what happened, the AI that we saw 6 months ago or the capability we saw 1 year ago, is not the same thing. It's actually tough to keep up with the new capabilities. And so what we're seeing here is that it actually saying, I don't know the answer to that question. Go to the website and maybe find out the answer to the question there. So that's a better response than we may have gotten maybe a year ago. And so let's go to the next slide. I'll tell you how we can actually ensure that we get the answers that we want. Okay, so the next thing that I did here, so there's a technique, there's an architectural pattern called retrieval augmented generation. So it is the pattern that we use within Copilots like Copilot for Microsoft 365. It is what others who are building search-based generative AI solutions are using. So retrieval augmented generation means that we're going to find the authoritative source of information. We're going to bring that to the model, and then we're going to let the model read it. We're not going to rely on the model to use its knowledge that it's been trained on or not trained on to give us an answer. We're going to actually go to the authoritative source. And so what I'm doing in this example here is I'm going to what you see me doing is a screenshot of the Syntegrity webpage for this conference. And I cut and paste day 1, October 8th, the agenda for this day. I've cut and pasted, and I went back to the same tool and I asked the same question with a difference. I said, what topics will be discussed on October 8th? Below is what you know, and I pasted this information from the webpage. And then let's go on to the next page here. Next slide, please. And so now when I've done that, it can answer the question correctly. So what have I shown you here? I've shown you a poor man's version of retrieval augmented generation. So what I showed you is how applications are being built to provide reliable outputs from a generative AI system. So what we do is we don't rely on the generative AI system's knowledge to answer the question. We use an intermediary. In my case, it was me going to the Syntegrity webpage. In reality, it would be a search engine or search technology. We use the search technology to extract the authoritative information. And the only thing we need the generative AI tool to do is accept conversational inputs and questions, and then give us conversational outputs. So that is one of the ways. Retrieval augmented generation is one of the ways that we're getting reliable outputs from generative AI systems. And then the way these will work as well is that they would provide citations as well to say, hey, here's the source of my information. You can go take a look there for more information. Next slide, please. There are other generative AI risks as well, though. So there's a risk of harmful outputs, hate, sexual violence, etc. So how do we mitigate against those? There's a risk of jailbreak. I think the first speaker talked about that one at length. Ungrounded outputs, which is kind of what I showed you there in the previous couple of slides. And then protected or copyrighted materials. These are all areas of loss of innovation. These are all areas where what generative AI did 6 months ago or 1 year ago is not what generative AI is doing today. Next slide, please. And so just speaking from a Microsoft context, we built extensive content safety capabilities into the platform, and we continue to iterate on those. And so some of the things, these are some examples. This is a look at our content safety tooling within the Azure AI platform. So you can moderate for content. So you can ensure that your generative AI tooling is not responding with hateful or harmful output. There's tooling inside to test the groundedness of your AI application to make sure that when it answers the questions, those questions are grounded in real knowledge that it has access to. Protected material content, we can ensure that protected or copyrighted material is not being output. By the way, Microsoft also offers indemnification for our customers who use our tools around copyright lawsuits, etc. And then jailbreak, indirect and direct jailbreak attempts, all tooling and infrastructure to test for and to mitigate as well, all built in. Next slide, please. That's my last slide. I'm not sure if I have time for questions. I know there's a panel a little bit later, but this is probably a good place to stop. So again, I have probably a more optimistic view than the first presenter, maybe more aligned to Dr. Amrit around what the potential of generative AI can be and what it is. There are lots of regulatory frameworks out there. In the case of the U.S. federal government, the White House issued an AI executive order, and then there have been subsequent memos from throughout the government to ensure that government agencies are building and deploying AI responsibly. And we have lots of confidence in those frameworks. And we're seeing that. I think the real key when we think about generative AI is to have a balance. So we need to think about responsible AI. We need to think about guardrails, but we don't want to over pivot in either direction. We also want to think about the innovative possibilities Dr. Arndt talked about some life-saving possibilities of generative AI. So we want to think about both. We want to make sure there's a balance between innovation and responsible AI. And from what I see, we're on the right path. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wole, for your insights. And I myself can tell that applications like Copilot are very useful. In clinical research, we deal with lots of unstructured data, as you already mentioned. We have archives here, libraries there, databases there. And these projects, clinical trial projects, they span over many years, many phases. There's lots of communication, lots of data gathered over time. And we have it running inside of our, not inside of our technology, but inside of our office application. So if we prepare for a project, what costed us maybe the work of a team spread over a couple of weeks, I can do it in a couple of hours by prompting and having the Copilot search into our archives and compare previous projects, fine-tune them to new ones. And also what I find very useful is the links. You can always verify where is this information coming from. There's direct links in there.
Right.
So I'm a fan of using it, but with a critical view always. Do we have any questions, Tamara?
Yes, we received some questions. Just a moment, please, and I'm going to read them to you. Does Copilot dig through employees' personal folders on an enterprise's server? I know a problem is that folks may save process documents on a personal OneDrive, but that's not available to the wider organization.
Yeah, so thank you. Great question. So Copilot won't go in, when you say a personal OneDrive, are you talking about what? Let me answer the question in a couple of different ways. So if you're talking about your OneDrive that is within your Office 365, Microsoft 365 environment, that Copilot will have access to that. If you're talking about OneDrive from your personal OneDrive from Outlook.com, not an enterprise component of Office 365, you won't have access to that. So I guess in short, it only has access to what's in your Microsoft 365 environment. So your Microsoft 365 OneDrive, the SharePoints that you have access to, your email, as well as your Teams messages, Teams chats and channels.
Thank you very much. And I would like to address the next question, although I must say I'm not really sure if that is a question for you now. If you cannot answer it, we will then pick it up again later at our question and answer session. So, excuse me. Can we anticipate any global guidelines by the safety committee, for example, such as ICG, GCP for clinical trials?
Yeah, so that doesn't seem like that's a question for me, but maybe we can, as
Yeah.
you said, take that during the panel.
Thank you. Thank you. We will do that. And what have been the greatest 2 or 3 challenges for organizations implementing Copilot or other AIs? What 2 or 3 organizational characteristics or decisions are most likely to lead to success?
Great question. I'd say some of the challenges that we're seeing, or some of the challenges that organizations have experienced, is first of all, understanding generative AI. So generative AI is very different from the way that we've experienced AI up until now. So one of the new things about generative AI is that it is probabilistic in its response. So previous versions of AI are what we call deterministic. When you ask a question, is this a cat or a dog? It will answer that question definitively. Generative AI is different in that when you ask generative AI, if you ask a question to generative AI and I ask the same question, our responses will be similar, but they may be a little bit different. And so that's what we call a probabilistic type of response in generative AI. So first of all, it's just understanding concepts like that, and then also understanding the concept of prompting. one of the interesting things about generative AI is that iterative prompting, it will deliver good results. And so if you've ever used ChatGPT, for example, and you've asked a question and maybe ChatGPT answered the question, but not exactly what you wanted, and then you go back and you refine your question a little bit more. And so what we're seeing is that working with generative AI is very similar to working with humans. So imagine a new person in your office, or someone who's a direct report. You've given them a task, they respond, but maybe not quite in the way that you want, and you have to refine and refine until you get exactly what you're looking for. And so that's one of the things that's different. So that learning curve around how do you interact with generative AI versus how you may have interacted with other systems in the past. And then the other thing that I think has been, I wouldn't say difficult, but it's just been a new experience, is just understanding it and really figuring out what are the right use cases for the organization. So what are the right places for us to use to build generative AI solutions within the organization? What are the best? Most organizations, when they're new to it, want to start with low risk use cases. So what are some of those low risk use cases that we should start with? So I would say those are some of the top things I would call out. The adoption piece in making sure that folks understand how generative AI is different and how to best use it, and then thinking through the right use cases for the particular organization.
Thank you very much. And one more time, I'm checking the chat here. So the list is pretty long already. Most of the questions, as already said, are from the other sessions before. We will address them at the end. Thanks everybody for sending them. One more, please, for you, Wole. While very good to an extent, generally, I see nightmare scenario here in the healthcare domain, let alone a medical domain.
Was that a question or a comment?
Yeah, a comment, I guess.
Okay.
Maybe something we can say to that.
I think
it was a comment. I'm sorry, it was a comment. The participant.
I would say in general, I would need to maybe explore a little bit more what the concerns are. In general, I think the way to look at any technology can be thought of as both a tool or a weapon, right? So that's where I talked about that balance. And so while we can probably imagine nightmare scenarios for any technology, there are also probably many life-changing scenarios as well. So I think it's really about understanding both and ensuring that we have guardrails to account for some of those other scenarios, but we are still taking advantage of the possibilities and the benefits of the technology.